Right, so the best amps under $200. Now has never been the best time to pick up a cheap guitar amp. There's an enormous number of high quality, wallet friendly amps available for less than $200. Here are 4 of the best. Number 1, the Blackstar Core 10V2. Over the past few years now, Blackstar have gone from strength to strength, building better and better amps that combine great sound with outstanding value. This is equally true for both their traditional tube amplifiers and their growing line of modelling amps. In the Core 10V2, it seems that they have achieved something quite remarkable in a practice amp that delivers everything at an absolutely bargain price. The Core is, at its heart, a modelling amp, giving access to a range of amplified tones and digital effects. The sounds you can quickly achieve from the Blackstar amp are jaw-droppingly impressive for an amp at this price point. It's not the most intuitive interface, but it works. A real strength of the Blackstar Core is the bundled Blackstar Identity software. This software gives you access to patches and recording, but most importantly is your hotline to the large and growing community of Blackstar players. This community are constantly posting new patches and suggestions for replicating classic tones and improving the sounds summonable from the amp. The stereo effects are also a real breakthrough for amps at this price point and compare favourably with many studio effects costing far greater sums of money. Number 2, the Orange Crush 20RT. The Orange Crush is by far the most eye-catching amp on this list, and it's not all good looks and no substance. It's a small-sized amp for 20 watts, and this is in part down to its smaller than average 8-inch voice of the world speaker. The small size isn't reflected in its sound though. It's surprisingly loud for such a small package and produces a rich palette of tones. The 20RT has 2 channels, clean and dirty. The rather unusual feature of the Orange Crush is the high gain preamp and then 4 stages of gain. This gives the voicing of the amp a real sense of detail. Although best used for practice, it's quite conceivable that the Orange Crush could be used live. It is certainly loud enough for small stages. The Orange Crush is not loaded with effects like the Blackstar Code, but the reverb core is excellent quality, and even when it's set to the maximum, the tone isn't lost and remains clear and distinct. For me though, the unique selling point for the Orange Crush is the cab sim feature. This means you can plug in headphones and the output accurately emulates the sound of a 4x12 orange cabinet. With practice amps, the headphone sound is very often a weak link, but the Orange Crush offers a very effective solution. Number 3, the Fender Champion 40. The Fender range of amps is almost as iconic as the Marshalls, and the look of the Champion 40 is classic Fender. The build quality too is impressive for an amplifier at this price point. It's a sturdy piece of kit that is built to last. At 40 watts of output, the Fender is the loudest of the amps in this review, and the 12-inch speaker handles this volume comfortably. As is now to be expected, the Fender comes with a range of onboard effects, including reverb, delay, chorus and tremolo. The effects are all of a good standard, and although separate effects pedals are better, the onboard versions here are still more than good enough to play around with. Not to be left behind, the Fender also features some amp modelling, which again is surprisingly effective. A range of amp tones from Marshall-like crunch to your more traditional Fender American voicings are easily accessible. The Fender Champion 40 comes highly recommended, particularly if you're planning to gig as well as practice at home. The extra power will make a significant difference. And number 4, the Line 6 Spider 5. Before you read any further, I feel that I need to give you all a disclaimer. I've always loved Line 6 amps. I think what they pack into a circuit board is nothing short of magical. The Spider 5 is the new budget line of amps from Line 6, starting at 30 watts, which is quite capable of producing some pretty loud sounds. I think you could happily use this for gigging, just not if you're planning to play too many arenas. The big selling point of the Line 6 amp over others on this list is the sheer variety of tones. The Line 6 includes all of the Marshall tones and speaker emulations that the Marshall Code does, and it includes all the Fender tones that the Champion 40 does. The effects included are enormous and can be edited in quite staggering levels of detail using the free app. The app also allows you to share presets you've created and download ones that others and Line 6 themselves have created. At first, many of the amp tones sounded a bit muffled to me, but with a bit of tweaking, mostly turning the presence up and the bass down, they became much clearer sounding. Playing loud also suits the amp well. The headphone output is very clear and makes practice sessions a joy. The build quality of the amp is good and seems far less plastically than the old Spider 4. Overall a fantastic amp and a great introduction to the Line 6 philosophy. So, final amp on this list is the Marshall Code. Now, Marshall are relative newcomers to the world of modelling amps. Much more familiar with the kind of the massive Marshall all-valve stacks. So the Marshall Code is a really interesting new development for them. It features modelling versions of all the famous Marshall amps from the past, such as the Plexi, the SLP, the JVM, all of those really famous ones. And that image of a guitarist stood in front of a full Marshall stack with that throaty bluesy tone is one of the most iconic guitar images. So if you're a Marshall enthusiast and you're nervous at the thought of a modelling Marshall amp, breathe a big sigh of relief. The Code amp is fantastic. It comes preloaded with 4 power amp models, 14 preamp models and 8 speaker models, and this means you can dial in all those famous Marshall tones really quite quickly. The speaker cabinet faithfully recreates the 4x12 speaker sound, but without, of course, the volume. There's also 24 effects which you can play or choose 5 to play from simultaneously. There's an app which is really quite good, and you can control the settings and really tweak things further. So, with those amps in mind, we need a verdict, a conclusion. First of all of these are good amps. If you're planning on gigging, I would recommend the Fender Champion for that extra power output and that little bit more volume. For the best kind of tone without any effects, the Orange Crush really has that down. Best all-round practice amp, I really quite wanted to say Line 6, but I think the Black Star is the one which really kind of is the best value and combines those great sounds with a really surprisingly low price. But my favourite, I think, overall is the Marshall Code. Classic Marshall tones, great effects, a really good looking, well built amp. Don't forget to check out more reviews and more articles on www.guitarlabs.com.